Welcome this morning to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. We're delighted to have you here so close to Thanksgiving. This is a special morning for me because our speaker is somebody I have known since I was 18, which is over 10 years ago. It's quite a while. We have one more program. Let me go ahead and I'll tell you about today and then what we have coming up. Then I want to introduce Laef. Much of what I would normally use as introduction we'll go through in our conversation. Today we will have coffee in the Tadlock House. We are grateful to the library for housing us a couple of weeks during the tumult after the fire, but we'll be back in Tadlock. We'll have coffee and some snacks. You're very welcome to join us there for some conversation with Laef and Ann. We then will go to lunch at 11:15. We'll be in the Tadlock room. You're very welcome to join us for lunch there, and we'll have some conversation about issues related to character as this connects to our Educating for Character Initiative grant. Tonight, we will have a reception at 6 p.m. at First Pres, and Laef is going to speak at 7 p.m. at First Pres. So please join us if you can. Next week is, of course, Thanksgiving break. The week after that, we will come back for one final go, which is on December 1st. Aaron Blake and Cornelia Lamley-Orth are going to come and talk about music. Today, we are in conversation about issues related to character, and hopefully we're going to get to some things about vocation, and hopefully we'll get to some things about resourcefulness. These are three things that we've been talking about through the entire semester. Character is related to this grant we have. It's something that we're trying to make part of the entire educational experience at King. Vocation, something that we've been working on for a long time. The notion of calling, as you face discerning that calling, not just immediately upon graduation, but throughout your life. And resourcefulness is our theme for this year. It's part of our mission statement. It's a word that goes in many directions. This morning, I think we're going to talk about resourcefulness, particularly with regard to stewardship, and some ways that affects people in the world of business. I should tell you that Laef began his career after college going to work for a bank in Chicago, where he suddenly found himself involved with the first ever online bank. He then moved through a variety of things, including Cars.com, Orbitz, and Oracle. And in each case, he found himself, and I think you may end up telling us more about this at some point, so I don't want to steal your thunder.
It is entirely possible.
I don't want to take all the thunder, but these are moments that he found himself put into a position of leadership, calling for character, calling for stewardship, and resourcefulness. And each one was a kind of vocational step in the journey. So I think those are really interesting points for us to dwell on a little bit as they touch on the various things that we've been trying to focus on as an institution. He now works for Apex Partners, which is an investment firm in London. Laef is joined by Ann, his wife, who has come all the way from Bozeman, Montana, as well, so we're glad to have them both here. Speaking of Bozeman, the most important thing you should know about Laef is that he and I met when we were 18 years old. We were 2 doors apart in our dorm, and that...
Luck of the draw. Luck of the draw.
Bad luck of the draw. But we've therefore been friends for a long time. And we have a group of friends who have stayed close. To tell you a little bit about Laef, you should see a photograph like this. In 2019, he invited 10 of us out to Bozeman for a little mini reunion. I put this picture up and then I realized that one person who's not in the picture is me because I was taking this picture.
He wasn't there, actually.
So I photoshopped myself into the next one. I've got the controller. There we go. This is in Yellowstone. What is this place called?
This is Mammoth Hot Springs.
Mammoth Hot Springs, which is an interesting place to go visit. And I am actually in that picture. One of the things that I enjoyed particularly about going to this day out in Yellowstone was a thing called the Boiling River. And the Boiling River, you go through the coldest water you have ever stepped in, and near it is a hot springs coming in, which is the hottest water you've ever seen. And they come together magically in these little hot tubs, which are no longer there, I guess.
No, they're there.
Oh, they're there? Okay,
yeah,
I thought there had been flooding or something.
Oh, no.
We're back, okay.
Yeah, we're back.
So brace yourself on the next photograph. I've never given such a photograph of a visiting speaker or myself. Keep your seats. I know this is, there's a lot of skin in that photograph. But there we are in one of the hot springs. One of the things that I'll come to in a moment is that character is formed not alone. Character is typically formed through friendship. Character is something we form with other people around us, whether it's in college or beyond college, and you do therefore have to question who is the bad influence on whom in that picture. Oh, hang on, I didn't get it. Oh. There we are, back in the day. So
Notice they're not lit.
they're not lit, no. We really don't know what we're doing with those, but still. I found that and I thought that needed to be up on the screen. So I want to begin with asking you, Laef, how would you define the word character? This Greek word that indicates the stamping of a coin. And so often that's an image that I use when I go to define character. This is something that you've spoken about, you've thought about. How would you define character for us?
So, interesting question, right? Like, I wouldn't reference myself an expert, right, in terms of the overall definition, but I do think that it is multidimensional, right? Like, there are aspects. We were having a conversation, actually, I think last night, where we were talking a little bit about work ethic, and it's like, work ethic a virtue? It's hard to say. Like, so I think there's things, the classical virtues fall into character. There's personality aspects that fall into character for sure. And I actually deal with that quite a bit in my hiring. We hire across our portfolio a number of executives, and so we're trying to discern certain aspects that are going to come as a package with this individual. And a lot of those things we've discovered come early, right? Early in life, whether it be, at your very young age and you were sort of in your formative years, right, by your parents or the people responsible for bringing you up. And then also, in later formative years, right, in school situations, in community, even in church, right, and other types of communities, these things sort of, they become part of who you are. So I think, you can, reference ChatGPT. Actually, you probably don't, right? But you can sort of identify the elements there, but they tend to be things like work ethic and personal integrity and the fruits of the Spirit, right? Kindness and things like that. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. A lot of these people are going to be writing resumes soon. How do you let those things come to the top? When you're looking at those things and trying to say, this is the right person for this job, what are things that stand out?
I think it's like character bears fruit, right? It's not character itself that you're trying to discern. It's the fruit of that character. And so, one of the things that I will tell certainly my own kids, right, but young people in general, it's like, there are certain things that you should try to demonstrate. And you have to demonstrate that before you get into the interview, right? But certainly one of them is just an expertise in something, right? Like I'm a huge fan of the liberal arts, and I went to a liberal arts college. I almost didn't graduate because I sort of dabbled in everything along the way. But this idea of being an expert in something and having expertise, like recruiters love that, right? Because it sort of demonstrates that you can go deep in an area. And I think it's closely related to, just being passionate about something, right? It doesn't have to be something related to the job, but I talk about that a lot in the hiring process, having hired probably literally thousands of people in my career now. But it's like, yeah, what do you like to do outside of work, right? Or like, what are your interests? And we spend time there because it sort of helps me unpack who they are as a person. And those are the things that you can't train, right? Like, I always tell the people who are hiring in our teams, I'm like, look for things related to talent and things related to their cultural impact. They tend to be things like your personality, right? You're not going to change somebody's personality, so try to figure that out, like before you hire them. And then, I guess you could argue that you could change their work ethic, but typically that is something that gets formed before they show up for the job interview, right? And so think of ways to illustrate those things in the conversation you're having with the recruiter or on your resume itself.
it's not much to say I am a courageous person or I am a wise person. I want to have something that kind of
Yeah,
shows that.
you know, you've always told me that you were those things, but
Yeah, I've got the T-shirt that says it too. Yeah. However, so this is something that, in the context of hiring, this is a very real question for you. How am I going to make sure that I'm hiring the right people along the way? As you have watched those qualities form in the people you have hired, is it something that then continues to kind of show itself as you watch that employee's progression as they move along? Do you see the connection between what you've discerned right at the first and the way that they continue to perform?
yeah, no, I think we do, right? The three terms that we used in the hiring process are talent, experience, and culture. This is actually really good if you're a student, right? Because you don't have a tremendous amount of work experience yet. But we always try to overweight in our hiring process for talent and culture. Experience is great, and many times you need specific elements of experience. But there's this talent aspect. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We call it fluid intelligence. And Arthur Brooks actually wrote about it pretty recently. He writes for The Atlantic. But he writes about there's two different types of intelligence, right? There's fluid intelligence, and then there's crystallized intelligence. And when you're younger, again, these things are not absolutes, right? There's exceptions to every rule, but typically when you're younger, you have fluid intelligence in spades, right? And it's this raw sort of willingness to work, try to figure things out, right? Like sort of explore. And then over time, you know, that begins to taper a little bit, and you have more crystallized intelligence, which is best described as wisdom, right? It's the collective learnings over time. And so, you know, I think what we typically try to hire for is that talent and, you know, the right type of personality. But then the reason we try to do that is we see those characteristics sort of persist, right? And, you know, that's really what you're looking for.
Speaking of fluid intelligence, you, when we were talking about this on the phone a while ago, mentioned that something that, as you have hit in different vocational moments, has called on you to learn new things, to be able to meet challenges that were not challenges you necessarily expected or had planned for. Can you talk through that as an aspect of the way that, both in terms of vocation, but also in terms of the building of that kind of intelligence, what some of those challenges have been and how they have shaped you?
Well, there's so many, right? Like, I don't think I've had too many jobs that I've been qualified for, right? And so you end up really stretching, right, to try to understand that. And part of that is, you know, you mentioned early on, that you're talking about resourcefulness and stewardship. One of the things that I really believe is that in a career setting, in a vocational setting, right, you have all sorts of resources, right? And you want to steward those resources well. But one of the ways you steward those resources well is by taking risks with them, right? You have a lot of knowledge that you've gained here. You have life experience, you know, and I think that has really paid dividends for me is a willingness to take risks, right, and jump into situations that you're not qualified for. You mentioned the internet bank. Should I tell that story?
You should tell that story.
So when I was very young, early in my career, I was working for a bank, and this was back when IBM was IBM mainframes and like old systems. It was they owned the banks. But Microsoft really wanted to get into the financial services world. And so I was like this young kid in IT, and nobody else wanted to mess with the toys, you know, the Microsoft toys that they had. And so I got tremendous opportunity. I met Steve Ballmer. He took me to a steak dinner. Like, they were really trying to wine and dine into the bank. But I mean, I was just like the emissary of the chief information officer. Well, they ended up sending me a beta version, an early version of something called Windows NT. And at the time, they had Windows 3.1. It was crappy software, but they were trying to have like a real like operating system, Windows NT. It was something we called 32-bit software. The problem with it is there's no applications written for it. Like they had the operating system, but there's nothing to run on it. And I found this, this thing called a web browser, and it was called Mosaic. And Mark Andreessen down in the University of, I think it was Southern Illinois, Northern Illinois, I don't know, Southern Illinois. He had written this, and then there was like a web server, and I installed the web server on one of our domain name server boxes in the bank, and we built an intranet. Like, this is like back in '93, so super early. And I got so excited about it. I'm like, this is going to change the world, the internet, like, you know, HTML and all this stuff. And so I gave a brown bag session at the bank. They did these once in a while, right? And I was talking about the internet. And people were kind of interested because this was a new thing, and they'd heard about it. They'd never been on it. And so a lot of people came, including people from our parent company. And I got laughed out of the room, right? I was basically proposing that we scrap this multi-million-dollar loan documentation system and scrap it and put it all in HTML. And of course, now, of course, you would do that, right? But back then, it was way too early. Like, even HTML didn't have the ability to do this. And so, yeah, I mean, it was sort of comical. And you know, this is risk-taking where you're out over the tips of the skis and you fail, right? But after it, one of the guys from our parent company who became my boss walked up to me and was like, could we build an internet bank? He's like, we have like, you know, online banking, but it's on AOL and uses like Quicken or Microsoft Money. But could we just do it in HTML, put it on the web? And I had absolutely no idea. So I was like, yes, we can. And we did, actually, but it was one of those moments where you were like, I think I'm just going to say yes and see what happens.
So you've linked risk-taking like that with stewardship.
Yes.
Can you talk us through the connection of those concepts?
Well, I think for me, you know, well, I mean, Matthew 25, right? Parable of the talents, right? So you've got, you guys probably know the story, right? But if you don't, you can go and read about it. But the guy goes away, he's got these servants, he's like, gives one guy 5 talents, one guy 2 talents, one guy 1 talent. The 5 guy, you know, what Jesus says there is he's like, he went away and he traded, and he made 5 more, and he had 10. And the same thing with the person who had 2. And the one who had 1 went and buried it in the ground. And, you know, you can imagine the master wasn't super happy with the guy who buried it in the ground. He's like, you could have just put it in the bank and got interest, right? And at least I would have made something. And what Jesus is talking about here is he's talking about the time period between when he goes away and when he comes back. And what should you be doing there? And the parable has probably lots of different meanings, right, as typical, but certainly stewardship is one of them, right? And it's interesting to me that Jesus specifically calls out in the story that he was trading. That's not a risk-free enterprise. And so the path that I think we're supposed to be on is that we're supposed to be stretching and taking risks. Not like foolish risks, but being willing to work in the unknown, right? And steward and the resources that we've been given.
How do you acquire, or I mean, I guess as you look on your own career, presumably the wisdom to know where the risk should be grows as you grow. How do you understand risk assessment in terms of vocation? If I'm going to do something that nobody's ever done before, when I'm young, that may feel like a different thing than when I'm, you know, over 30, as you and I are. You know, how does that assessment change over time, do you think?
Well, I think you gain wisdom. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, a lot of this comes from the school of hard knocks. Mm-hmm. Probably calls for another story. When I was at this company called Orbitz, it's an online travel website. Right now they're super common, but back in the day, there was like Expedia, Travelocity, and Orbitz, and we were way behind. And so we were willing to take a lot of risks, and we learned to take risks, and we sort of worked in this management culture of like, nobody was really gonna get fired for taking extraordinary risk, like failure was something that was gonna come. Well, then we got bought by this company called Sendit, which was a huge conglomerate, and they had plans for our technology and everything like that. They weren't about taking risk, and so there was this clash of cultures. And I was in New York City, and I was talking to our chairman. We had a big meeting about our plans for what we were gonna do. They had all of these financial models that were like, gonna save us, $200,000 a week if we got all this system technology work done. And they asked us to present our plan. And our plan was, we were gonna complete all this in November of the year. I think it was like, 2005 or something like that. And they were like, yeah, no. Actually, Henry Silverman just kind of looked around the room. He's like, we need this done in June. And we had already built what we thought was the most aggressive possible plan to change all this technology, to like move all these different online businesses, cheaptickets.com and trip.com, move them all onto the Orbitz platform. And it just takes time. And we had like 200 developers, and we didn't, but he was like, no, it has to be June. Like, we're burning all this cash. We need to like get out of this model. And so it was like just this, I was just in this super risk-taking mode, right? And it's just like, okay, what if, well, actually, I think what I said was, if we got it done in June, can I get a little walking around money? And they just looked at me and they were like, what? I'm like, well, we're gonna have to like do some extraordinary stuff here. I'm gonna need some money to lubricate the gears here. And it was, I was like just still a kid, right? I mean, it was crazy. And Henry Silverman was like, can you get it done in June? I said, I can get it done by the end of June. And he's like, done. How much money do you need? And I'm like, I don't know. I just made up a number. I was like, I think like $100,000 would be great. And so he said, done. And my boss was looking at me. He was like, I don't know what you just did, but you're going to be in big trouble because. And what we did is we actually built we built the system, but we did what I call the Cortez model, which is you burn the ships. And when we were converting all the data into the new system, we didn't allow for a fallback. And so we didn't have the ability, once we moved forward, to go back to the old system. There was no chance for failure. And I do remember being on the phone. We didn't have Zoom at the time. We just had these call bridges. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. No one had said anything for like an hour. And one of my engineers was working on a problem named Warren. I'm like, Warren, how's it going? And he's like, not good. But by 6 a.m., we were back up and live, and we had everything running. So I don't allow people to take those kind of risks now on my team because it was way too risky. But over time, you calibrate that. Like, sometimes, that was actually a story, an example of where, I didn't get fired, but I could have very easily, right? It could have been really catastrophic. So, over time, I think you do learn to judge those things better.
You gave me a title, which is Fail Forward Fast. We talked about as you're looking at risk as a way of trying to live out a good life of stewardship in business or whatever field. What happens with failure? And why was that your title that you suggested?
So that was from those early days at Orbitz, right, where we were trying to catch up, and we weren't sure if everything was going to work, but we didn't want to be paralyzed by analyzing things, right? And so we just accepted that failure was okay. If you have a culture that you sort of create that, and I think it comes from having, three things. We talked about a couple of them, right? One is risk, the willingness to sort of take risk. right? Having a really strong work ethic and like, I'm gonna work my way out of the problems that show up, right? And then having, a lot of fluid intelligence, right? Like a lot of sort of just raw talent that you can sort of work with. And we had those things. And so it worked for us. I'm not sure it would work in all situations without sort of bringing those cultural elements together.
In terms of vocation, we've talked about young Laef in that early kind of context. Did you have a sense, or could you have had
Are you
a sense?
saying I'm not young?
Over 30, I said. We're both over 30.
Yeah.
Could you have had a sense of where vocation was going? Like the sense of calling that you had, say, coming out of college, to what degree did that morph and change over the years? And in what ways do you look back now and think, okay, I now can see this path?
I think I was super ignorant, right? Like I had a vision for what I wanted in my life, and it was not what I ended up doing. In fact, I made many attempts to go back to that, right? Like, I had a mentor in college, a guy named Bruce Howard, who was the head of our business department, and he was like, you should go work in operations, right? You should learn how the bank works instead of just trying to get to your sort of international finance thing. Like, you should go see, like, how do things happen behind the scenes? And that's where I went to work. It didn't make very much money doing that, but, my talent for technology was recognized, and I was transferred against my will into this systems group. And then later on, like I went to, this internet bank episode, right, where I went to work for our retail bank, do an online bank. My thought was that I would then stay on the business side and sort of become an actual professional as opposed to just someone who plays around with tech. But then I ended up, back in the technology world. So eventually I just decided to stay.
So how would you describe the calling you have in the workplace?
I think the calling I have was discovered more than sort of grasped, right? Or it sort of discovered me. As it turns out, I wasn't that great of a technologist. Like, I'm okay. But as like an individual contributor, like there were just people who were far more brilliant than I was at that. My gifts, as it turns out, were more in coaching and managing and leading and try to create organizational clarity about what our vision was and so forth. And so I gravitated more towards management. I've had that discussion with people on my team many, many times, right? A lot of organizations, like if you want to make more money, you've got to get into management, which is idiotic, right? Like some of the most important people in your organization are those experts, right? The individual contributors who just get stuff done, and they're not really leading people. And so I've always tried to change that model and have like an individual contributor career path. But I think that has ended up being my calling is leading teams, trying to create high performance teams that work really well together, that trust each other, help people grow and ultimately be better than me, right? Which is great.
Management is a term that we can think of as a kind of cold word.
A what?
A cold word,
Okay.
where somebody tells you what to do and doesn't have that sense. How does management for you express itself as a kind of Christian calling? How do you see the work that you're doing as service to the people?
Well, I think that's it, right? Like, we talk about servant leadership. We don't talk about servant employees very often. And when I was working for this bank, I got transferred into the systems group, and it was headed by this woman named Jean Lebliner, one of the most influential people in my life, right? She was so great in so many ways. But I was like terrified. I walked into this group, first day, had never even met her before. I had been transferred into her team. And she's like, Laef, so glad you're here. Come into my office. And she closed the door, and it was like one of those banking, it's like all this mahogany and chandeliers and thick carpeting. And I was so intimidated. I sat down in the chair, and it went super low. So you're just like up at the desk like this. She's like, Laef, It's great having you on my team, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to work in my group. Your job is to make me look good." And then she left this pregnant pause where I contemplated the meaning of my existence. And then she said, "And my job is to make sure you always get the credit for making me look good." And I was like, "Oh, interesting." And it was just the way she said it. It was just a little kind of provocative. But it taught me, and she lived that out, right? Like, I ended up getting promoted a number of times, largely because she was out there championing who I was. And it's a really important lesson for leaders in terms of how you should manage your team and the importance of giving your team the credit for the work that they're doing. It's also a really important lesson for employees, right? And she was just like, "Listen, if you and I both keep those things straight, things are going to go really well." And they did, right? Because I was willing to learn that lesson of humility and service, and really work to try to make her look good, and then I received the benefits from that.
Great. Moving a little more into a wider vision of what we mean by character, the jobs you've been in are very demanding jobs. Here you are at 3 a.m. on phone calls with
Yeah, I don't do that anymore.
That's good. That's wisdom right there. How do you find that forms itself in balance with the other things that are calling on your life? The family, the church, the community. We should probably have Ann.
We should have Ann come up and talk about her widowship, right?
So how do you find that kind of balance as you go through, and
It's super hard.
Yeah.
It's super hard, right? I think, particularly if you find success in your career and people do find you to be a super valuable employee, right? And they give you more responsibility. And if you're a risk taker and you assume that responsibility, right, it can sort of become this sort of overwhelming aspect. And certainly, we live in Montana now. The reason we moved to Montana was because I was running this huge collection of online travel websites all over the world. eBookers in the UK, travel sites in Australia. I was running all of United Airlines globally, all their reservation, baggage control, airport kiosk systems, all reported into my group. And it was insane. It was just too much. And we had 4 little kids. And so we moved to Montana, where I had 11 people working for me at the time. And we did grow that company. We sold it for almost $2 billion to Oracle at one point. So, but at the time, it was a complete sea change, and it was intentional. We just needed to make a change of some kind like that. And so you don't always get it right. Like sometimes you end up in situations where you're like, well, okay, this isn't good. The important part is then sort of making a course correction at that point.
And how have you been able to work into that church life, community life, other things that call on your time?
Yeah, I think that those are things that need to be there, right? I mean, and I think I learned these lessons when I was a young person, right? Like, I was super blessed to have parents that made me go to church, and it became a pattern of the importance of that community, and we're certainly blessed by our current church and the community that it provides. Even that picture you showed, right? It was just super fun to see all those guys that we were so close, right, in college, and but having even that ongoing community, I think, is just a really important aspect. So, I've never been a workaholic to the point where, I just had to.
And Montana seems to have provided all kinds of other opportunities.
So many distractions.
Laef is not only a pilot, he makes his own elk sausage. He is...
Doesn't everybody do that?
He's an apiarist. He keeps bees. And how do those sort of things that we would classically call avocations, how do they feed into your life in general? And sheep, I left sheep out.
Yeah, no, we raise Icelandic sheep as well. We're kind of getting out of that business maybe,
Okay.
but we have a few still. I don't know. I don't know. I was always wired this way, right? It's why I went to a liberal arts college, right? It's just this idea of learning a little bit about all sorts of things. I'm not very good at any of those things, but I'm good enough, right? And it's fun. It's a distraction. I think when you're in the world that I'm in too, right? Like it can get a little surreal, right? I mean, the company I work for, we have like $77 billion under management. And it's just like there's just too many numbers there, too many zeros. It's just nice to be able to walk outside and, feed some sheep, right? And just do something different than all the tech. And it's just AI all the time now, which is a little, it's just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little bit something.
Yeah, a little bit something.
Yeah.
So. Do you mind if I use AI, by the way, in answering these questions?
I assumed you had been.
Yeah, right.
You've got that earpiece. As we have a few more minutes, as we think about, for many people in the room, there is a looming job search coming.
Sure.
And it is going to be something that may or may not be very exacting. Some people are studying nursing or accounting, and you have a sense of where that's going. But a lot of liberal arts graduates just have this blank slate that's waiting out in front. What do you say to people who are looking at that blank slate?
Ooh. Yeah, I had the same blank slate, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's fine, right? Like there are jobs out there. They're not necessarily jobs in your vocation. None of my jobs have been in my vocation. And so, and like I said, I wasn't necessarily qualified for all of them. But I think preparing yourself well, both in your vocation and outside your vocation, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, right, in terms of, having some area in your life that you are an expert in. In my case, I was a hacker. Back in the day, we didn't have the internet, but we did have the Apple II computer that Steve Jobs had created, and we had a lot of people writing software for that computer, and they were copy protecting it. And the best software was like games, like Castle Wolfenstein and stuff like that. And they were all copy protected, but I was part of this group in Minneapolis that figured out how to break that copy protection and copy the games and distribute them to our friends and other people. Super illegal, probably felony level theft. And I was interviewing. It's the only job I've ever gotten that I wasn't networked. Right? So the easiest way to get jobs is to be networked, right? To know people and people who know people, and you get referenced in, and it helps so much as a hiring manager. You have some kind of a reference. This one, I'd had no references. I was just applying for a summer job at Honeywell, and I was in the interview. It was like an IT help desk type thing. And he was like, "What kind of computer experience do you have?" And I was like, okay, I'm just going to put it out there. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm a hacker. He's like, what do you mean a hacker? And I told him what we did, and he was like, can you come on Monday? Like, you can start. He just wanted somebody who like knew more than like how to read a manual or something, right? So was that your question? I told you.
Well, it's more or less. Yeah, I mean, I think that, in other words, a sense of openness to something that I don't necessarily feel like I'm great at.
100%.
But I'm willing to work at. I'm willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
To go into that kind of position.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, the expertise, the passion, the risk taking, like all those things are really attractive, I think, to a lot of hiring managers.
A couple of minutes left. I want to ask you, one of the things that in character education becomes important is the idea of the exemplar. Most of us can think of somebody who is our character mentor, as it were. I had the pleasure of knowing Dennis Olson, your dad, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about him, because he seems like such a remarkable character to me.
Yeah, no, he was. I mean, I'm a little biased because he's my father, but he was very quiet. He was Norwegian. He was Lutheran. He didn't say much, but when he did say something, it was always very thoughtful. But I think the things that he really taught me, he was always the most valuable employee, but he was never the highest paid employee. Mm-hmm. He never had the biggest title. But when I was super young, he worked for a nuclear accelerator. This was where they smashed atoms. He didn't have a college degree. right? So you think about it, he was surrounded by these physicists. And I remember going there. It was this crazy thing the University of Minnesota had built underneath these neighborhoods in northeast Minneapolis. I don't think anybody knew they were smashing atoms underneath them. And all of his colleagues, I'm like a little kid. And they all went out of their way to say, like, your dad runs this place. Like, we're just, the PhDs, but he, like, runs it. Wow. And it was a super cool place, too, because we got to play with liquid nitrogen. If you ever have denatured alcohol and you pour it on a concrete floor, and then you pour liquid nitrogen on top of it, super cool. Like, really, really fun. But yeah, I think through his whole life. And then he, like, went on and he lost that job. He became a piano teacher. Not a piano teacher, a piano tuner. My mom was a piano teacher. But then he got a job at Honeywell as well. He made laser gyroscopes for the space shuttle. Wow. I was just like, okay. So he just had this willingness to just do the work, right, and learn what he needed to do. He didn't have the fancy title and degree. But he was always, I think, the most valuable employee, which is a great place to be, right? Even if you're not the most highly paid employee, it's great for job security.
That's great. There's a lot of wisdom in there. We appreciate you very much for being here. Let me remind you again that we have time for coffee and some treats in the Tadlock House afterwards. Please join us if you can. Lunch at 11:15, and then again tonight we'll be at First Presbyterian Church from 6 with a reception, and then the talk at 7 o'clock. Please join me in thanking Laef Olson.
Yeah, thanks everyone.